Arthur had retired quietly, without any fanfare or farewell party. After 40 years of various blue-collar warehouse jobs, long commutes and endless routines, he was finally free of time cards and schedules. He didn't celebrate. He simply came home one grey evening, poured 2 cups of coffee and told Mara, "That's it, I'm done." She smiled the way she always did, soft and knowing. "Good," she said. "You've worked enough for 3 lifetimes. Now you can finally slow down with me." And he did. Their apartment was small but warm, filled with the sort of quiet that made the outside world seem far away. The walls carried the scent of Mara's cooking. Garlic and rosemary, old wood, and the faint perfume she always wore. In the evenings they sat together by the balcony window and watched the city lights flicker. They listened to music and watched the TV. The world still rushed outside, but in their little corner of it, time seemed to move differently, slower, gentler. Then one rainy night, while walking home from the small grocery on the corner, Arthur heard a faint, broken sound from an alley. A soft mewl, weak and desperate. He found the cat half hidden beneath a dumpster, its fur matted, eyes sharp, vivid green. It didn't hiss or run, just stared at him as if recognizing something. Arthur knelt down and said, "Hi there, little guy." He decided to bring the cat home. The cat was thin. It didn't hiss or struggle, just blinked at them with an odd, calm intelligence. Mara knelt beside Arthur and smiled. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" "His name is Sam. I found it on his collar," Arthur said. From that night on, Sam became part of the household, curling up on Mara's lap in the evenings, following Arthur from room to room, and watching the window as if guarding something unseen. Life was simple, and that simplicity was its own kind of joy. Mornings with coffee and news, slow walks to the corner store, small dinners with laughter and candlelight when the power flickered, the sort of happiness that didn't need to be named or explained. But beyond their quiet world, something was shifting. Arthur noticed it first in people's faces, on the bus, in the shops, in the endless chatter of the news. There was a new hardness there, an edge that hadn't been before. Everyone seemed angry, impatient, brittle. Neighbors stopped greeting each other. Conversations turned into arguments. People shouted in traffic over nothing. The air itself felt charged, tense, like the city was waiting for something to happen. The news never stopped feeding the fire. Stories of corruption, new viruses, economic collapse, riots, conflicts overseas, and endless political shouting. Everything became about sides, about winning and losing. Even friends began to talk to each other like opponents. Arthur and Mara talked about it sometimes, in the evenings when the lights dimmed. "People are just tired," Mara would say, running her fingers through Sam's fur. "The world is too busy now. No one listens. They just shout." Arthur would nod. "Feels like the city's boiling. One day it's all going to spill over." But beneath all the noise, the anger, the fear, the competition, something else was growing, quiet and invisible, a sickness no one yet recognized for what it was. Arthur remembered hearing rumors once, years ago, of a failed experiment, a bioweapon that was never supposed to exist, a virus that could sleep inside its host, dormant for years until triggered by light. He dismissed it back then as nonsense, another paranoid story in a world with plenty already. Now, though, the memory lingered, and that strange documentary he'd seen years ago, the one his old friend Colin Reeves had once told him about. Something about weaponizing pathogens, light, reactive compounds. Arthur hadn't seen Colin in over a decade, but he remembered their last conversation vividly. It was at a pub after work, years before Arthur retired. Colin had been drinking hard that night, hands trembling, eyes wild with a kind of guilt Arthur couldn't place. "It's not what they said it was," Colin had whispered. It wasn't a weapon in the way people think. It was supposed to be control, behavioral modification through biochemical light receptors, a way to stabilize people. But something went wrong. Arthur hadn't known what to say back then. He thought it was just drunken rambling, the kind of secret every scientist thought they were burdened with. It began with little things, small, unsettling moments that Arthur tried to brush off. The first time it happened, he was walking to the grocery store early one afternoon. The sun was pale behind a film of clouds with that stillness before it rained. People moved with the usual rush, heads down, eyes on their screens. He was waiting at a crosswalk when he noticed the man beside him, well-dressed, briefcase in hand, standing completely still, not tapping his foot, not checking his phone, just staring at the sky, eyes wide open, unblinking. Arthur hesitated. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked. The man didn't answer. His lips moved slightly, as if whispering to himself, but no sound came out. He just kept staring at the sky, his face twitching like something inside him was trying to surface. Arthur hurried away. He told himself it was exhaustion, maybe heat stroke. People got strange sometimes. City life wore them down. But after that day, he started seeing more of it. A woman at the bus stop muttering nonsense while clawing at her own reflection in the glass. A group of teenagers laughing too hard, too loud, until one of them suddenly screamed and bolted into the street, nearly getting hit by a car. The car screeched to a stop. He then jumped onto the hood of the car and started punching the windshield until his hands were bloody, then laughed and ran off. Even the dogs in the park had changed. They barked at nothing. Arthur tried not to tell Mara everything he saw. She worried easily, and he didn't want to bring the ugliness of the city into their home. But he couldn't hide all of it. One evening, as he returned from running errands, his hands still shaking from what he'd witnessed, she met him at the door. "What happened?" she asked. He set the bag down slowly. "Just people acting strange again?" Arthur hesitated, glancing toward the window. The last of the daylight spilled across the floor, and Sam was staring at it, tail flicking. "They're not themselves," Arthur said quietly. "Like something's wearing them, or watching through them." Mara frowned, but didn't laugh. She'd seen enough in her life to know when Arthur wasn't exaggerating. That night, as they sat together by the dim lamplight, Arthur finally told her everything. About the man at the crosswalk, the screaming teenager, the way people's eyes looked in the sunlight, and about how Sam seemed to sense it before he did. "He always knows," Arthur said, scratching the cat's chin. "Whenever something's wrong, he freezes, starts staring at the windows like he's waiting for it to show itself." Mara looked thoughtful. "Animals feel things we can't. Maybe he's protecting us." Arthur smiled faintly. "Maybe." At first, the difference between night and day only seemed practical. The infected wandered less under the moon, their movements slow and uncertain, as if the darkness soothed them. But then came the mornings, the hours when the light began to return, and that was when Arthur noticed something far more terrifying. It began with a sound. One morning, just before sunrise, he heard a low, rising wail from the streets below. Not a scream, not quite human, more like the sharp cry of something waking from a nightmare it couldn't escape. He went to the window, careful to stay behind the curtain. Below, in the mist, figures moved, jerky, chaotic, twitching like marionettes, cut free of their strings. They collided with walls, stumbled into cars, clawed at the air. After watching them for a while, Arthur noticed that there were smartphones on the ground. It seemed like they dropped them and just walked on as if they were irrelevant now. The morning felt like a new world was waking. As the sunlight grew stronger, their bodies seemed to jolt, as if something in them had been switched on. Within minutes, the moaning gave way to shrieks, raw, fractured sounds that tore through the still air. Arthur backed away from the window, his heart thudding. "Mara," he whispered, "wake up!" By the time she joined him, the sounds outside had become deafening. The infected were slamming against metal doors, clawing at fences, tearing at anything that cast a shadow. The virus, dormant and sluggish in the dark, was photoreactive, its neurological stimulation triggered by direct sunlight. One morning, a group of infected had wandered to the edge of the old park. As the sunlight struck the first one, it began thrashing wildly, clawing at its own skin. The others followed, their movements escalating until the entire group had turned on one another in blind frenzy. By midday, the park was silent again, the ground littered with what the light had left behind. For the survivors, this changed everything. They learned to sleep through the daylight hours, curtains sealed, doors braced, silence absolute. Sometimes Arthur could hear them outside, pacing, muttering, their voices fractured into strange, rhythmic sounds. One moment they were sobbing like frightened children, the next snarling like feral animals. Arthur kept a journal, documenting what he saw. At night, they hum. At dawn, they scream. By noon, they forget. By dusk, they die a little more inside. Mara had read those words one night and quietly closed the book. "Don't write too much. You'll dream of them." He had smiled faintly. "I do that already." The survivors learned quickly that venturing out in the daytime was no longer impossible, but it was a gamble with death. Arthur called it the Whisper Walk. When food supplies ran low, they would usually move at night when the infected were still sluggish or asleep, if it can be called sleep. Mara always stayed near the back, carrying the packs. Arthur led. Sam padded silently ahead, his tail flicking in warning when danger was near. The infected could sense them if they came too close. A sudden turn of the head, a hiss of breath, a spasm of limbs. That was the signal to freeze. Stillness meant safety. There were close calls. One morning, as they moved through the old library district, a group of infected erupted from a storefront, their eyes wild and unfocused. Arthur and Mara ducked behind a burned-out bus, barely daring to breathe as the infected tore at the street, smashing glass and going wild in a blind rage. Afterward, when silence returned, they moved on, shaken but alive. Over time, they began to see the rhythm of it all, the way the infected breathed with the light like a tide rising and falling. The night was theirs, but the day belonged to the madness. The city under moonlight was a ghost of itself. Quiet streets littered with abandoned cars, broken glass, and the strange hum of wind through empty buildings. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Arthur, Mara, and Sam moved carefully through the back streets, keeping to the darker paths where the glow of the moon guided them. Sam padded ahead without a sound, his green eyes catching the faintest light like tiny lanterns. Arthur carried a small flashlight, but rarely used it. They were heading toward the research district, a stretch of old labs and offices sealed off years ago after the funding cuts. It was where Colin Reeves had worked before the rumors began. Talk of secret projects, biological trials, and experiments that even the military denied. It seemed like walking through the ruins now, under the cold moon. Those words returned with new weight. "Arthur," Mara said quietly, "what if he's not there anymore?" He looked at her, the shadows softening her face. then we'll look until we know. Someone has to remember what they did. They turned down a street where the signs still read Vanderbilt Labs. Inside, the complex was half-collapsed broken windows, overgrown weeds, shattered monitors glinting in the dust. Sam stopped near the entrance and sat perfectly still. His tail flicked once. Arthur froze too. He'd learned to read Sam's silence. It wasn't fear, it was warning. The air around them felt wrong, heavy and static, as if holding its breath. They moved inside. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell, chemical rot and mold. Arthur's flashlight flickered across broken lab tables, overturned computers, and faded safety posters. On one wall, a line of text was still visible beneath the grime. Phase 4. Light response testing. Caution. Arthur's pulse quickened. He brushed off the dust off a stack of binders. Pages were filled with dense graphs, gene maps, chemical formulas, all labeled with words like receptor adaptation, behavioral shift threshold, UV neurological triggers, and one phrase that appeared over and over again, luminal exposure event. Mara leaned closer. What does that mean? Arthur's throat tightened. It's the light, he murmured. Daylight, the full spectrum. It's not the virus itself that drives them mad. It's the activation, like flipping a switch in the brain. The night was thick with fog, heavier than usual, and the moon hung small and pale behind the clouds. Arthur, Mara, and Sam had just returned from Vanderbilt Labs the night before. The trip had left them shaken. Still, they needed supplies. They set out again, sticking to their usual quiet paths. Sam walked ahead, tail low, ears turning at every sound. Mara clutched Arthur's sleeve as they moved through the cold, mist-filled streets. Then, movement. A faint shuffle, a whisper of feet against broken pavement. Sam stopped dead, his fur lifted along his spine. "Arthur," Mara whispered, "we should turn back." Before he could agree, something clattered far behind them, a loose sign blown by the wind, or maybe something worse. Arthur turned for just a moment, and when he looked back, Sam and Mara were gone. "Mara," he called softly. The fog answered for her. He took a few steps forward, heart racing, raising his small flashlight in panic. The beam cut through the mist like a blade, and silhouettes moved in the fog. Pale shapes, slowly turning heads, the infected. Arthur froze as they drifted towards him, drawn by the brightness of the flashlight. He swallowed hard, backing away. His hands shook. The infected came closer, whispering broken sounds, their eyes reflecting the beam like dull glass. Arthur took another step. A hand grabbed his coat, yanking him violently sideways into a narrow alley. He dropped the flashlight. The stranger's hand slapped over the lens, killing the beam instantly. "You shouldn't use that out here," a low voice hissed. Arthur stumbled back, breathing hard. The stranger held a lantern, the flame dim but steady. In its glow, Arthur saw the face. "Colin? Dr. Colin Reeves?" Colin gave a tired smile. "Still alive, still watching people make the same mistakes." Arthur steadied himself against the wall. You pulled me away from them." "You nearly lit yourself up like a beacon," Colin whispered, glancing toward the foggy street. The infected drifted past, unaware now in the dimness. They're drawn to bright electric light. Flashlights are the worst thing you can carry. Arthur pressed a hand to his chest. "Mara. Sam, we got separated." "I know," Colin said. "I saw them. Your cat led her home before dawn." Arthur's shoulders sagged with relief. Sam got her back? Colin nodded. That cat understands this city better than any of us. He knew exactly where to go. Arthur let out a shaky breath. Thank God. My scout's seen them. They're safe for now, Colin said quietly. As long as they stay in the dark. The two men stood in the narrow alley, the fog swirling around their feet. Colin adjusted the lantern, lowering its flame to a faint orange glow. Arthur steadied himself. You were part of it, weren't you? The Lumina 9 project? Colin hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I helped design the early emotional regulation trials. It was supposed to calm people, make life easier, make work tolerable. But the people funding it... He trailed off, his voice rough. They didn't want balance, they wanted control. Arthur stared at him. You mean... It was greed, Colin said simply. Pure and unfiltered, the idea was to make people obedient, compliant and productive, no matter what was happening around them. When the tests failed, they pushed harder, they ignored the warnings. Arthur followed the narrow, quiet path towards home, the lantern Colin gave him glowing softly in his hands. When Arthur reached the building, he tapped 3 times on the metal frame. The door opened almost instantly. Mara pulled him inside with trembling hands. "Arthur, I thought you—" Her voice broke before she could finish the sentence. "It's okay, I'm fine," Arthur said gently, placing the lantern on the table. Sam ran to him immediately, circling his legs. Arthur reached down and scratched behind his ear. "You got Mara home," he whispered. "Good boy." Sam blinked. Mara closed her eyes. "I'm so glad you made it back." Arthur nodded. "Because Colin Reeves pulled me into an alley." Mara's head snapped up. "Colin? You mean the real Colin Reeves, the one who wrote the journals?" "Yes," Arthur said. "He's alive. He's been watching us, watching other survivors too." Mara sat in stunned silence. Arthur continued. "He warned me. No more flashlights, ever. Bright electric light draws the infected instantly. He said to use lanterns. Fire confuses the virus. It can't interpret living flame. Colin told me the virus wasn't meant to make people insane. It was meant to make them obedient, calmer, easier to control, but greed twisted the purpose. The virus bonded with emotion, with fear, anger, despair, especially when exposed to sunlight. Later that evening, Mara brought out some of the journals and recordings that she brought back from the lab. She opened the first binder, flipping through brittle pages lined with diagrams and signatures. She read aloud, her voice strained. Lumina 9 is intended to subdue emotional volatility in civilian populations, to ensure productivity, to foster obedience during economic instability. Arthur felt the anger rising in him, slow and bitter. Mara turned the page. "Here, look at the signatures." She pointed to a list of names, not scientists. "Politicians," Arthur breathed. "Cabinet ministers, foreign officials, intelligence directors. And below them, the names of billionaires, CEOs and private donors who had bankrolled the project." Mara's voice shook as she read. "Our financial partners believe Lumina 9 will bring a new era of social harmony. They envision a world where populations no longer resist necessary directives." Arthur clenched his jaw. "Necessary directives," he repeated. "That's what tyrants call their whims." Mara kept reading. Projection. With widespread deployment, global unrest and dissent will become manageable. Populations will be more compliant, less violent, easier to direct. Arthur whispered. They didn't want peace. They wanted power. Then they found a taped interview log. It was dated 2 years before the outbreak. He pressed the play on his tape player. Static cracked. Then a voice, calm, rich, dripping with smug certainty. When people stop fighting, they stop demanding. They stop questioning. They produce. They obey. With Lumina 9, we don't just calm the masses, we shape them. We become the architects of civilization itself. Another voice came on, colder, calculated. The light will ensure obedience. It activates the serum. Think of it. Every sunrise a reminder of who holds the reins. Mara covered her mouth. They thought they were gods. Arthur nodded slowly, sickened. Gods with rotten teeth and bloated egos, corrupt men convinced they were chosen by destiny. Mara whispered. And instead, they unleashed hell. Arthur closed the binder. There's nothing more to learn from them. The only truth is that they destroyed the world chasing the illusion of being untouchable. It took 2.5 nights of careful travel, guided by Sam's silent confidence, before Arthur and Mara finally reached the old subway exchange where Colin had said he would be. Fog clung to the stairwells and the dripping echo of unseen water. Sam moved first, tail low, ears angled forward. A scout born of instinct, not training. When they stepped into the central chamber, they froze. Dozens of lanterns glowed like constellations, placed carefully across the floor. Bedrolls, crates, water barrels, patched clothing, a small village carved into the underbelly of a dead city. Perhaps 30 people moved quietly among the fires, each face worn but alert. Dogs lay at the tunnel mouths and cats rested atop rusted railings watching everything. Colin Reeves rose from a crate when he saw them, relief softening the deep lines in his face. "You made it," he breathed. "All 3 of you." Sam trotted up to him, brushing his leg as if greeting an old acquaintance. Colin knelt down and scratched his ears. "You were always the anomaly, weren't you?" he whispered. Arthur and Mara sat near the closest lantern while Colin poured water into dented cups. The quiet around them felt intentional, respectful, as though the community had learned the value of silence the hard way. Then Colin spoke. "I've been gathering reports for months," he said, eyes dimming with the weight of the knowledge he carried. Before the collapse, intelligence and medical networks were still monitoring global numbers. "Based on everything we've pieced together," he paused, exhaled, "out of 8 billion people, only about 3 million never developed symptoms, people like you, immune for reasons we still don't fully understand." Mara exchanged a look with Arthur, not of shock, but of grief. "And the rest?" Arthur asked quietly. Colin swallowed. "Roughly 700 million survived the activation phase, but they didn't stay themselves." He stared into the lantern flame. "You've seen them. Slow. Blank. Their minds stripped of memory, language, intention. The virus didn't kill them, it reduced them. They live off whatever the earth gives them. Vegetation, moss, fallen fruit. Like humans before tools." Mara looked down at her hands. "Primitive." Colin nodded. "And harmless most of the time. But we can't kill them, Arthur, not just because it's wrong, though that should be enough. The virus is adaptive. It learns from behavior. If we kill them," he met Arthur's eyes, "they will learn to kill back. And efficiently." Arthur felt something inside him tighten, the realization that survival meant restraint, not dominance. "So we avoid them," Colin continued. "Give them space. Let daylight be theirs." "And night be ours," Mara added softly. Colin smiled, grateful she understood. Weeks passed, and the village grew closer, more coordinated. They planted gardens in shadowed courtyards, built rain collectors, repaired old pumps, and learned the silent choreography of nighttime civilization. Fire rings kept the infected at bay, Lanterns marked safe paths, and the infected changed too. They no longer shrieked or chased or clawed at shadows the way they once had. Now they shuffled through daylight like sleepwalkers, aimless and gentle, unable to recognize anything but food, warmth, or shelter. Their rage, once terrifying, had burned out like a dying engine. Humanity had divided itself into instinct and intention, day and night. Then came the night that astonished even Colin. Arthur, Colin, Sam, and a scouting team were out gathering canned goods from an abandoned grocery store when Mara appeared with two other women from the settlement, Evelyn, a former baker with silver threads in her hair, and Alina, once a kindergarten teacher. All three wore calm expressions instead of fear. "Mara," Arthur whispered, "what are you doing out here?" "We need you to stay quiet," she answered. Before Arthur could ask, Evelyn whistled, softly, carefully, and the sound floated into the fog like a feather. From the alley and the park, shapes emerged, 3 infected, slow, pale, expressionless. Arthur's heart seized, and Colin instinctively stepped in front of him, only for Mara to gently hold him back. "Watch," she whispered. Each woman held a piece of flatbread, thin, round, carefully baked. The smell drifted through the air, browned wheat, warmth, memory. The infected stopped, swaying slightly. Mara stepped forward, slow as a tide. She held out the bread, her hand steady. Sam crouched beside her, watchful but unafraid. The infected reached out hands, trembling, not with aggression, but confusion, and took the bread. They sniffed it, then ate, chewing slowly, almost thoughtfully. No snarling, no lunging, no fear. Arthur felt tears prick unbidden. Evelyn and Alina offered their pieces too, and the infected accepted with childlike gentleness. Colin whispered, awestruck, "You fed them?" "We've been doing it for weeks," Mara said. "Quietly, at night. They never hurt us. They just take it and leave." "Why?" Arthur asked. "Because they're still human," Mara answered. "Just different now." The infected finished eating, turned, and drifted back into the fog as peacefully as they had come. Silence fell, not tense. Arthur looked at Mara with something deeper than admiration. It was recognition. She had not lost faith in the broken world. Time moved differently in the Lantern Age, not by clocks or calendars, but by seasons of fog, cycles of moonlight, and the quiet rhythms of survival. Years passed since Arthur, Mara, Sam, and Colin helped forge the small nocturnal community beneath the ruined city. Children had been born, elders had gone peacefully into the night, and lanterns now lined the rooftops like a trail of stars guiding every wanderer home. But the greatest change was not among the survivors, it was among the infected. What began with shared bread beneath a flickering fire became something no one had expected, responsibility, not forced, not voted on, simply understood. Feeding the infected became an unspoken duty, a ritual of acknowledgement, not charity, a quiet promise that they still do belong to this world. Every few nights, small groups of people ventured to the borders of daylight territory. Dogs stood guard, cats kept watch from high ledges, and the infected would arrive slowly, cautiously, as though participating in a sacred exchange. And when their children began appearing, small, glassy-eyed but calm, the survivors knew that the burden of humanity had not ended. It had changed. So they adapted. At first it seemed impossible. The infected could not speak, did not remember, could not reason the way they once had. But they still learned in spirals rather than straight lines. Colin suggested simple tools, carved wooden spades, baskets, stone hammers, The infected touched them, examined them, and sometimes imitated movements they saw. It was Mara who realized the key. "Don't show them with words," she said. "Show them with hands." So the survivors worked in silence, in full view. They planted seeds, tied shelters with rope, patched broken walls with mud. Slowly, painfully slowly, the infected copied them. A year later, the day people were tending their own gardens. Another year, and they began repairing the ruins where they slept. They learned not because they were pressured or commanded, but because someone had shown them how. Children of both worlds even played nearby, though never too close, never unattended, and the dogs and cats watched with an ancient patience, enforcing boundaries without violence. It was the strangest civilization ever built. Two branches of humanity divided by daylight and united by necessity. Sometimes, around the low evening fires, the survivors wondered aloud, was this outcome inevitable? Did nature correct humanity's imbalance? Or was it punishment for ambition turned cruel, a consequence of men trying to sculpt obedience from the human soul? No one knew. There was no one left who could. But Arthur had a theory, one he rarely said aloud. Perhaps the world had not ended. Perhaps it had been reset, softened, humbled, slowed, to give humanity a chance to remember what it once knew. Maybe the infected were not a tragedy but a reminder. That intelligence without empathy becomes a weapon, and progress without restraint becomes ruin.